Now, we often talk about the increasing attempts by the government to threaten internet freedom, privacy, create new ways to monitor what you do and say online. From CISPA to the FBI's push to force tech companies to create a backdoor for authorities, there's a lot going on. But there's also a large push out there to help internet users retain their anonymity, even monitor how much meddling there is on your computer's network connection. From the TOR project to the Open Observatory of Network Interference. So I guess that it just makes sense, too, that one of the people behind these tools has himself been a government target. Here to discuss this with me is Jacob Appelbaum, developer with the TOR project. Jacob, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so first I have to, go back a little bit because I do wonder if all of your experiences have somehow led you to what you're creating now. And so just tell me a little bit of how your life has changed since WikiLeaks in terms of every time you try to travel and, you get interrogated and you get your things confiscated.
Well, I mean, I've been a cypherpunk and working on sort of liberation technologies, if you will, for a number of years. And obviously, after speaking on behalf of Julian at Hackers on Planet Earth, that meant that I got to experience what it was like to be watch-listed and harassed and to experience the sort of COINTELPRO 2.0, if you will. And so that has really, in a sense, convinced me that it is a necessity to build privacy and anonymity and security technologies that are accessible to everyone.
But the technologies, for example, the TOR project that you're working on, would that have helped you when it comes to border searches and seizures, which the government now takes good advantage of? Obviously, it's not just you that it's happened to. We've had David House on the show a lot of times who it's happened to.
No, I mean, it's part of a larger strategy, which is this idea that liberty is something we should have in our society. And so this is just one part of it. It doesn't help with border searches directly, but you can use TOR, of course, to download information across the border so you don't have to carry it on you, if you want to do, for example, or to view things so that when you're in another country or in this country, it's much more difficult to actually monitor what you're doing. And not because it's illegal.
How does it work exactly?
So the TOR network is basically made up of a bunch of nodes in the network, which we say nodes, but realistically it's just people at their house clicking, I want to help the network. They click, I want to help. They become part of the solution. So this is sort of a mutual aid and solidarity-based solution, and it's a peer-to-peer network. So you browse the web through TOR, and the way that works is you pick 3 computers at random, or 4, and then you route through each of them. And each one of them has only a small piece of the information. So the first one knows who you are, maybe, or where you're coming from, but they don't know where you're going. They only see the second one. And the second one knows about the third and the first, and of course, the third knows where you're going, but they don't know that you're, for example, here anymore. And so that compartmentalization is what we would call privacy by design. So there's not a central authority that runs this, that can do interception on it. We'll never put a backdoor into TOR. I mean, I would never do that, and no one else working on TOR would do that either.
Well, what do you think about that, since you mentioned it too, because we just spoke about this earlier this week, and it's not the first time that the feds have tried to do this, but right now we just found out that the FBI has been lobbying heavily. They've been going, to meet with Facebook, with Google, with these big companies in Silicon Valley and try to ask them to not oppose this piece of legislation that's going to force them to actually put this backdoor in. I mean, what are companies supposed to do in that sense?
Well, consider that the history of the FBI is one of racism and violence. We know this from COINTELPRO in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and we learned this through the Church Committee. It doesn't surprise me that the FBI, continuing with that trend, would take it to the digital sphere. And it seems to me that the key thing is to reject these proposals, and not only to reject them, but to understand that when a company accepts them as inevitable, then that is a company that does not serve the interests of the Constitution. It doesn't serve the interests of the American people. And so we will not do that. We will not put a backdoor in. And part of the reason is because it is impossible to ensure that the backdoor will only be used by so-called good people. Because as far as I'm concerned...
Or only for real investigations, right?
As far as I'm concerned, the C in CALEA, this is the original law enforcement wiretapping stuff from the 90s about the internet and about modern telephone systems. The C in CALEA might as well stand for China. If Lockheed Martin and Google can be compromised by the Chinese, I really doubt that their so-called lawful interception capabilities will remain secure. That to me just sounds like quite a statement without any evidence to back it up, without any proof that their previous systems are secure, for example.
So why do you think it is then that companies like this, I mean, so far we haven't heard an outcry from them, and when it comes to CISPA at the same time, right, most of these major tech companies are in fact supporting it, with the exception of, I guess you could say, Facebook and Microsoft, that are now in this weird gray area where they say they're concerned about privacy, but they haven't fully come out, in the way that we saw with SOPA and PIPA. So Why? What are the dynamics of that to you with these companies?
Well, I think that, part of the thing that is scary about the American political world right now is a real nationalist drum beating. And there is a real fear, especially because, as people, I think, rightfully would say, there's a serious threat of terrorism from al-Qaeda, like this underwear bomber thing that just came to the surface a couple days ago. People don't want to stop legitimate law enforcement investigations. And when there's an economic incentive to not stop that, then it's tricky, and it's even trickier still. And so part of it is that people want to support legitimate things while also standing against the illegitimate things. And it's really hard to do that precisely because the kind of backdoors the FBI is asking for, those backdoors, they don't have a human involved necessarily. And so that means the ethical, tricky parts just get automated out of the job. So I think a big part of it is that these companies need to pick and choose their battles, because when they lose these battles, in some cases it will destroy their business models, especially places that become data silos. If you have no Fourth Amendment rights with third parties, that's a really serious problem for every third party that makes their money looking at your data. So I think they want to make sure that they can balance those interests, but at the same time I think they don't want to light a fire under the wrong people and start a fight.
Well, especially, I guess, when you start becoming close with Washington in a lot of ways, too, right? And Eric Schmidt flies out, and they have a Google party around the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and, you're hobnobbing with all the people in power. Tell me more. So we spoke specifically about the TOR project, but tell me about UNI, where you can actually figure out what kind of censorship or surveillance is out there whenever you, hook up.
Sure, yeah. So the TOR project is also involved in a thing which we're calling the Open Observatory of Network Interference. And the basic idea... I
didn't want to have to say all the words.
Yeah. The basic idea is that you can, have a human rights style observation program. So, just like we have human rights monitors looking at human rights violations, access to information, the right to speak freely, the right to read, these are things that we cherish. The United Nations, the Constitution of the United States, these are things that we're constantly reinforcing. And so the UNI project is an idea that we should have open methodology, open source and free software tools that implement that methodology, and open data for peer review and independent verification, which allows people then to write papers that talk about the political or the socioeconomic perspective of things that are happening. So we see censorship of services like Google, or maybe we see services that are not Google, but that are very regional specific things. And this idea of this project is to bring everybody under a big tent and say, let's talk about the censorship that's happening in the framework of human rights and in the framework of human rights reporting. And it's run by Arturo Falasto and myself from the TOR project. And we are currently looking for people that want to hack on it. And we are basically building these tools, and they'll be available for everyone.
Somehow I get a feeling that within our audience you might find a few people that are interested. And so just before we let you go here, I have to ask, because we finally have you in studio, is there anything that you can talk about in terms of an update, with WikiLeaks? Have you been asked to go to the grand jury in Alexandria here? Anything?
So I've never been subpoenaed to the grand jury, and I'm really glad about that. And to the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been any further crazy legal stuff that's happening. I did have the displeasure of meeting the Deputy General Counsel of the FBI at an Open Society meeting not too long ago, a couple weeks ago. And she sort of hinted that I might know something about national security letters, and I wasn't sure if that was a hint that maybe there was one for my email or something like that. But I wouldn't be surprised if we learned something more about that. But I've also heard that maybe they're, going to leave me alone. But, the thing about this kind of crony capitalist faux democracy nonsense is that they essentially have this, sort of favor, this sort of currying favor with officials attitude. And, this is what, we were raised in the United States that was so bad about Russia during the Cold War, which is this idea that you have to know somebody to get off these kinds of lists. And if you don't, curry the right favor, your life and your career will be destroyed. And it's like seeing that kind of repeat itself here is really depressing to me. So I'm hopeful that it's over, but I also know that these things don't end themselves. We have to build alternatives that make sure that those things go away.
Well, we'll definitely be keeping an eye on all of it. Jacob, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.